What is it that you believe? This is your foundation. It's kind of like, remember, this is pre-Jesus, Psalm 23. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me, and your rod and staff comfort me. This is a fundamental truth. Psalm 91, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. When I was about 21, before I became a Christian, before I'd met dear Pam, I was at a country dance and got into the progressive barn dance. Anyone knows what the progressive barn dance is? Yeah. And when thank you. When the music ended, I was dancing with a beautiful young lady. And so we sat down and we started talking. And the first thing I remember her asking me was, did I believe in God? Beautiful young girl asks you whether you believe in God, what are you going to say? Little tip there for you fellas. All right. Our true foundation is also revealed when things go really bad, when it's a life or death situation. And I think I've probably shared this before up here. The old expression, people say, I've come to the end of my rope. And then people say, well, tie a knot and hang on. And so you do. And then what happens when you're lying face down in the dirt holding the frayed end of that knotted rope? Where did you fall to? Because that's your foundation. Wherever you stop falling and you land, where you land is your foundation. 2 Sundays ago, I had a call out of the blue from a primary school friend, and he has been in contact with us probably 3 times over the last 3 years, something like that. And we go out and have coffee, and it was 2 Sundays ago he had rung and we went out for coffee. His name's David Thiel and his wife Gillian. David is a retired Seventh-day Adventist pastor, been a missionary. And so we catch up. Anyway, why I mentioned that is that we were talking about old times, obviously. And David, as we're primary school kids. And he was at me all the time about God, all the time. This is a kid, and I think I've shared this. This is the kid that, you know how they used to go door knocking? He would go on his own as a primary school kid. Yeah. It was no surprise he became a pastor. But he was at me. I was an easy target. And I could take you to the spot in Innisfail where this happened. We were walking home from school. He was at me. And I eventually said, David, look, if there is a God, let him strike me dead now with a bolt of lightning. And we both kind of went, he because he didn't want to get hit with any overflow. And I, because deep down in my heart I did believe. That's the reality. In spite of my yabbering on, I might also add that funny how things go. We were probably 13 by this stage, and we were going on a 20-mile bike ride, not kilometres, 20-mile bike ride. And as you guessed it, we're on the main road. This is the Bruce Highway. And he's about God. And I said to him, trying to put him off, you can't believe the Bible because you read one version and it says this, and then you read another version that says that. And I thought that was that was my big, And he goes, show me. I think I probably rode on the remainder of the kilometres in silence because I hadn't read the Bible at all. Anyway, but that stuck in my head. And when I did become a Christian at about the age of 23, he was one of the first people I rang. And he kind of said, About time. All right. For you sitting here and having at the deep core of your belief, you believe there is a God, you're not alone. Everyone, the Bible says, the truth is, everyone not just believes, everyone knows there is a God. Knows there is a God. Because in the book of Romans, now Paul wrote to the Romans, so this is a very early development of the church. It was a very new thing. And he's writing to the Romans, not to the Jews, he's writing to the Romans. So it was a mix of Jews who had become Christian and those who had come out of the world and become Christians. And he's writing to them. And in the very first chapter, chapter 1, he makes this statement. And we got it there now. I can barely read that, so you're probably struggling as much, so I'll read it here. This is one of those pivotal scriptures. This really reveals the truth of what's actually going on. It says, the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what is known of God is revealed in them, for God revealed it to them. For the invisible things of him since the creation of the world are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, even his everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse. Because knowing God, they didn't glorify him as God, neither gave thanks, but became vain in their reasoning, and their senseless heart was darkened. This is significantly important. This kind of reveals why there is global conflict going on around the world. And where, even right now, where everything is headed. This is the reality of where we're at. So knowing there is a supreme being independent of us is actually everyone's default setting. Even if we don't or won't admit it. And this is because, the evidence is there. And you can go and do a test, some scientific test, and get a result, and then tomorrow go and do the same test and it's the same result. It's independent of us. Now, if we reject the truth, so we know it, but if we go, not having that, don't believe that, then what we are forced to do is we have to use our imagination to come up with an alternative. We have to create an entirely new background story. So the foundational question of life is whether we have accepted or rejected God or not. And you could say, well, you better define which God we're talking about. Of course, there's a scripture in Revelation chapter 5 that says that all of the creatures, so the fish and the birds and the bears and the lions, all sing out praise to God. It's one of those scriptures where you have to read it 3 or 4 times and go, did I just actually read that right? It's no surprise because God says I can make the rocks cry out if I want to, and the planets actually do. So that reveals there's a whole nother universe out there that we don't really know. So when people are asked whether they believe in God, few people actually say no. They may say it, but it's not what they really believe. That is, they may say no, but they don't really believe that. What they really mean is that they got a problem with Christianity. That's really the truth of it. It's Christianity and its rules that they are rejecting. Usually people have just a whole lot of questions, who, what, when, where, why, about God. And you think about it, the world's population is predominantly religious. The sticking point is always, what do I do about Jesus? As he's the face of Christianity. Jesus was asked one day by one of the religious leaders. Actually, he was challenged. And it was, what's the one great thing? They said, what's the greatest commandment? Meaning, what's the one thing that would define our religion or define the truth of the universe? Put it into one sentence. What's the most important thing? And this is, because his response is, this is not just for Jews, this is for everybody. So Jesus goes to, we read in Mark, he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, with all of your soul, and with all of your strength. Then he says the second is like it. You love your neighbour as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. It's interesting, don't you think, that he doesn't say the greatest commandment is to believe. The greatest commandment is to love. He presumes that there is a foundation from which to launch from, because love is an action. And love is the first action from that foundation and because of that foundation. And to obey that commandment, to love the Lord your God, is only possible if you have that foundation. It's a bit like, ever been in a swimming pool with kids? And, you're throwing the kids, not to each other, throwing them, they're doing bomb dives and that stuff. Ever tried to do it when you're both treading water? Someone's got to be standing on something immovable. All right. The Bible says that if we reject the Bible truth, we become vain in our thinking. That means that we have to turn to our own mind and come up with something. We become the go-to person, the authority. So what do you think about the world? Well, this is what I think. That's interesting. We also become senseless. Where do people go to make this stuff up? And it says they become blind, groping in the dark. Who's heard of Helen Keller? Everyone? Anyone not heard of Helen Keller? So Helen Keller was born in 1880, and she was born perfectly normal, but when she was about 18 or 19 months old, she got sick with something. There's a bit of a variety of opinion about what it was. The end result was that she was blind and deaf. And so before she could even learn to speak, she had no contact with the world anymore other than touch. And so her story is actually a pretty astounding story. And I won't go into it all now, but she said in a letter, so eventually she learned how to communicate. She said in the letter that she had always known about God even before she had any words. Even before she could call God anything, she knew God was there. She didn't know what it was. God had no name for her, and nothing had a name for her. She had no concept of a name, but in her darkness and isolation, she knew she was not alone. Someone was with her. She felt God's love. And when she received the gift of language and heard about God, she said she already knew. So what the world fundamentally believes is actually foundationally important. It's because of what's coming on the world. What's coming on the world is because of the world rejecting God. That's what the scripture says. And Jesus, there's in Matthew from 5, 6 and 7, is called the Sermon on the Mount. So what was happening, Jesus had been preaching for about 2 years, and he had chosen his disciples, and there was a great crowd of people following him. And so he sat down on a mountaintop, and then he began to define and describe what it was to be a follower of God. This is this. It's not that. It's this. And he went through it, and it's 3 chapters of Matthew. And at the end of that, he sums everything up with this. He says, everyone, therefore, who hears these words of mine and does them, they're like a wise person who built their house on a rock. The rain came down and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it didn't fall, for it was founded on the rock. Everyone who hears these words of mine and doesn't do them will be like a foolish person who built their house on the sand. The rain came down and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, and great was its fall. The reality is there are only 2 foundations. Everyone stands on one foundation or the other. That's the truth. We believe in God. He is the trustworthy rock that cannot be moved. when the storm comes. We reject the God, we are stepping off the rock. What are we stepping onto? And of course, our life is basically what we build on that foundation. Our whole life, everything we are and do is based on whatever the foundation is that's from our heart of hearts. That's where we go. So how long or how stable, how long-lasting, how good it is going to be entirely based on what the foundation is. And I just feel I need to clarify that I'm sure we all know very successful non-Christian people who have built great businesses, great careers, become famous, have everything that opens and shuts, and it's like, well, you're successful, there's no storm that's washed you away. The reality is that storm, that rain that's going to come down and that flood, that's going to be when you die, that's when it's going to find out what your foundation is. And that's you can have all of the wonderful things in the world, but if you don't have God, at the end of the day, it's going to be nothing. There's that old saying, I'm sure you've heard it, what's the point of climbing the ladder of success? Clambering over the top of people to find that when you get to the top of the ladder, it's leaning against the wrong wall. And the closer we get to the end of the church age, we're in a battle. We're really in a spiritual battle. And that battle is for our allegiance. It's for our heart of hearts. That's where it's really at. And everything stems from that. Because God said, the greatest commandment is love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. There's a progression. We start with our heart, our spirit, and that affects our soul, and that affects then how we live, what happens out of that. So Exhibit A is evolution. It used to be when I first got saved, I was a believer in evolution because I come out of the world. And I thought it was perfectly okay to hold to that. It was an intellectual position. There were people who were saying, no, God created the world. And I'd go, no, science is, no. And it was an intellectual position. But the problem is, you probably are aware that the whole thing of evolution really took off in the mid-1800s, early 1800s. Charles Darwin got a hold of it and really developed it. But at the time, it was a fringe, off to one side idea. It was a bit extreme. And main thinking at the time was Christian basics. By the time we got through to probably the 1960s, it had become mainstream. It had shifted from fringe to mainstream, and Christianity was being shifted off, being pushed off to the side. And the church began to stand up at that time and say things like, hey, this is not just an intellectual argument. This is going for the foundation. If we don't, when you eliminate God from being accountable to God, and then you just invent anything you like, then you can be anything you like, and you can start treating people any way you like. And that's what we've seen. So now we've got to this point where people have ditched the scriptural values. There's a complete abandonment now. We have same-sex marriage, no marriage, just live together. Changing of genders. You can invent your own gender. I don't know, is it 240 or something considered genders, Or just add to it if you want. There are no universal standards. And now we're in the process around the world now, you see it in America particularly, also in Europe, where they're not only rejecting Christian values, but they're making those things into law. That you can't do things now that you could do as a Christian. In some places, it's illegal to preach. You can't mention the name of Jesus on the street. So that's how far we got. Because we have abandoned our Christian values and we've taken on something else. And now Christianity is not just the fringe, we're now the lunatic fringe. And Exhibit B is really, I've been watching, sometimes I just need a bit of entertainment at work, so I listen to what's going on with the US presidential election. It's sometimes amusing and sometimes just, I got to switch this off, this is too frightening. But what's going on over there is really a mirror of where the West is at. And this is what we've got now, is where one side is wanting to re-establish essentially Christian values, old traditional Christian values. And the other side is wanting to abandon them completely and set into law the fact that you can't apply those values. That's what's going on. I was actually talking to a woman yesterday downtown, and she actually brought that up herself. We are the world's in a very scary place. Okay, going back to where Jesus, at the end of chapter 7 of Matthew, where he finished the Sermon on the Mount, just go back a little bit to some of the things he said in the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about entering by the narrow gate. He says, and talking about life, this is life. He says, enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. There are many who go in by it, because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and few find it. And you kind of get the impression that you're walking along the path of life, and then there are two gates, the road forks, and you have to choose. There's no middle. You either choose the narrow gate, which is pretty dull, perhaps a bit overgrown with some vines, and very unappealing, and you have to get rid of all of your junk that you're carrying to actually fit through the narrow gate. And the broad gate, of course, is lit up with all kinds of lights, and every child wins a prize. All the flashing lights, and everyone who enters gets a free set of steak knives, and it's very, very appealing. And you kind of could say it's a bit like that intellectual argument. The two seem to be side by side. What's the difference? But when you get in, you find that the two paths diverge and eventually are going in 180-degree opposite directions. Now, it doesn't say that in there, but that's the inference, that at some point, because one's going to life and the other one going to the opposite of life. In these days, God is shining his searchlight on your foundation. This is really important. And if you are confident in God, that this is your foundation, that's what he wants. This is we have confidence. So this is, the world can throw any argument at you, and you are sure, you are confident, because you know the truth. Deep down in your life, you know what your foundation is. And it kind of, almost in some ways, it doesn't matter what your head is saying. Except that these days, God is saying we want the head and the heart saying the same thing. And this is really important. This is true for people who are non-Christian, who today say they don't believe. It's like the searchlight is being put on, what do you really believe? Forget what you're saying. What do you really believe? Because there's many people who are in the valley of decision. And the reality is they do actually believe. You know that, I'll jump down here a bit. You know that no one can force you to believe? I'm not talking about what you say, because people can force you to say something. They can put a gun to your head and say, you don't believe in God or I'm going to blow your brains out. They can threaten you. But they can't threaten what you really believe in your heart. That's entirely your choice. Entirely. And it's a free choice. It's, just going back to the beginning, it's what you really believe when there's no other sound. What do you really believe? And no one can affect that. All the arguments are all up here. It's what you really believe down here. So remember that worldly logic or every bit, I'm going to say now, every bit of worldly logic is actually aimed in the opposite direction. That's the fundamental truth of it. The world, its logic is designed to deny that the foundation is the rock. Have you noticed that now if you're looking around at the world, there doesn't seem to be any no man's land anymore? You know, again, talking about that intellectual argument, people are drawing up sides. You know, it's extreme. People have gone radical. And when people take a radical position on stuff, no amount of intellectual argument actually has any... You know, I watch a lot of stuff online where people are talking about gender stuff. You know, they're saying, listen, a man is a man, you know, a woman is a woman. You can change clothes and you can do surgery, but you can't change the fundamental reality of what you are. That's scientific. But that argument, you might go, oh yeah, that's a logical argument. Not through the world. It just, you see it again and again. They just refuse to come to that. It won't do it. It's a radical extreme. And it was the first time, watching some of that stuff, first time I got acquainted with the word gaslighting. I didn't even know what gaslighting was. But yeah, it's just telling porky pies as if they're the truth. And you think, you know, you people are not just telling lies, you actually believe this stuff. You're so convinced that it's right. We've moved so far. Okay, so the world would actually have you believe that there's lots and lots and lots of different options and opinions out there, but the reality is there isn't. There's only two. You either believe God or you don't. You either stand on that foundation or you are standing on sand. And we're seeing in these days this battle unfolding in real time. So going back to the very beginning where I started this, what do you believe in your heart? Where do you stand? Is it the rock that you're standing on? And for those, you know, can I just speak this to those who would say in their heart of hearts, yes, I do believe in God. It's true, I do. I don't know how to define that, but I do. So there's one more step that needs to be taken, and that is to accept that Jesus is actually the rock. He's the foundation. And when we really appreciate that, what we have to realise what it all is about is that Jesus paid the price for our salvation. We couldn't pay it. There's no possible way. It's a bit like, this is my understanding, imagine your life as a white sheet. And somewhere along the line, you mess up and there's a black spot. It can be tiny, but now your sheet is no longer white. Has a black spot, and you can't remove that. And the only way you're going to get into heaven is that you have to have a perfectly pure white sheet. You can't just say, oh look, Jesus, it's mostly white. He goes, yeah, but there's a little black spot there. I can see it even with the magnifying glass. The only one who can remove that black spot is Jesus. He's the only one. When he applies his blood over that, it washes that black spot away. We can't do that. He's the only one. And to become saved, we use the term saved because it's saved from the nasty place and saved for the glorious place, is when we just say, Jesus, I can't do it on my own. I recognise that I got actually a few black spots. Would you please wash them away? And this is one of the most astounding things about life and Christianity and salvation is that, again, this is not just an intellectual argument. We're actually talking about a real person. And when you give your life to him, he says, I will manifest myself to him. And we, talking about the Father and the Spirit, we will come and make our home. Not just come for a visit, for a cup of tea, we'll make our home with you. And I can you know, I've had a few experiences. First on when I first got saved. Again, I think I've shared this. Pete, if I have shared this, just give me a nod. When I first became a Christian, my relationship was with God, G-O-D. Wasn't with Jesus. Jesus was a swear word in our house. And I had a real difficulty relating to Jesus. God, easy. Jesus, I couldn't quite get a grip. And I'd go to church and everyone would be talking about Jesus. Oh, Jesus said this, and oh, how wonderful Jesus was, amazing. And I had a great experience, and I'd be going, don't know. That's not my experience. And it got to the point where I had to get before God and say, Lord, I don't have any relationship with Jesus at all. And I think, no? Anyway, I'm telling him, I'm in prayer, I'm actually on my knees, lights out, total darkness, even gotten the hands in the appropriate position, please. I'm covering every base. And I said, I don't know Jesus. That was what I was trying to say. And I was only saying it in my mind, wasn't speaking out loud. But I didn't even get the sentence finished. I don't have any relationship with... And while I said that, a grey square appeared in my mind, clear as anything. And it interrupted my flow. Please, thank you. I said, I don't really have any... A grey square? It was a grey square. A grey square? And then it was a rectangle. Oh, it's a grey rectangle. And then it was red. Oh, it's a red rectangle. And then it was a man's hand. And the pool of blood in the hand. And I knew in that moment that I had met Jesus. And that, you know, you have these encounters where it just changes your life. And I've had plenty of, won't say arguments, discussions with people about God and the existence of God. And the one thing they can't shake me on, I've met him. I know that God is real. And you can buffalo with me with all of your pseudoscience, but the one thing that you can't touch me on is I know he's real. Let me just say this to close off. Many people make choices because of peer pressure. They want the immediate approval of those around them, to hear them say, well done, you're one of us. Meaning, you've earned your place. And they equally fear being rejected by them. This is a bit of a counterfeit, because this is what God is planning to say. If you stand on that foundation, then he's going to say one day, well done, good and faithful servant. But if you step off and choose to have the sand, then what he will say is, depart from me, I never knew you. Now, no one here wants that. I can guarantee you, no one. If you had just a glimmer of what eternity in away from God is, no one would go there. No one. Everyone would want to go where it's light and is free from pain. So I'm just going to close it there and invite anyone, if you have any doubt in your mind where you stand, then don't let another moment go past where you don't go, I'm going to just clarify this right now, thank you very much. I want it straight in my mind. I want to be able to stand before God and go, thank you. You know. And you know, when I first became a Christian, it wasn't very manly to be a Christian. When I first went to church, it was really embarrassing because there were people that I recognised from school. And I had another little experience while I was in church. I think it was the second time we were in church. I was there with my sister. We both were on this journey together. And there was a lot of people there. It was a Pentecostal church, and people were raising their hands. This. And there is no possible way on God's green earth that I'm going to stand here with school blokes and raise my hands. Anyway, I noticed out of the corner of my eye, my sister went halfway. And I thought, all right. And I was on the aisle. And I said, all right, I'll give you that. And I had my eyes closed. And the pastor must have come past and he grabbed my hand. And he pulled it up. And he turned it around like that. And I opened one eye just to kind of acknowledge and thanks. And he was down the front. There was no one there. Oh, I just went goosebumps. The whole my hair stood on end. But I knew that I had met God. God will meet you. I can guarantee you. You give your life to the Lord. If you're in that place where, I don't know, not sure, God will meet you. He will step forward and meet you. You don't have to go to him. He will meet you. He guarantees that. I will come and make my home with him. I will manifest myself.